She got stopped at the gate of the elite golf club because of her faded black t-shirt and worn-out jeans. Private tournaments don't take strays, the manager snapped, her finger wagging like she was chasing off a stray dog. One preppy kid laughed. Are they letting in janitors now? She said nothing. Just grabbed her old golf bag and walked forward, through the laughter, through the whispers, until one flawless shot left them all stunned into silence. The golf cart sputtered once and died in a puff of gray smoke right at the wrought iron entrance of the Essex Hollow Golf and Country Club. Clara Fisher sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly, feeling the heat of every eye at the valet stand sear into her skin. The valet boys, all sun-kissed and smug in their navy polos, glanced at her battered pickup truck like it had delivered a pile of trash onto the pristine driveway. Beyond them, the wealthy members, men in pressed slacks, women in flowing linen, pretended not to notice, which somehow made the rejection even sharper. Clara climbed down, brushing dust from her second-hand jeans and faded t-shirt. The shirt bore a peeling logo of her brother's auto shop, the only clean thing she owned that morning. Her sneakers, once white, were scuffed and sagging. The guards at the entrance exchanged glances, their posture stiffening with the kind of politeness that had razor blades tucked underneath. "Ma'am," one of them said, with the exaggerated patience people reserved for nuisances. "This is a private club. Members and their guests only." Clara held out a yellowing envelope, her fingers steady. "I'm here for the Essex Hollow Open qualifier. Name's Clara Fisher. I'm on the list." She spoke plainly, without a hint of apology. The guard sighed through his nose, as if he were being asked to perform a grueling task. He turned and beckoned for a tall woman in a white skirt and visor, the club manager, judging by the badge on her chest. From a few steps away, Clara heard the manager murmur, "She must be lost. We have a dress code." There was laughter behind her. Dry, knowing, effortless. Several players lounging near the patio leaned in, whispering behind sunglasses. One man, cradling a gleaming 9-iron, said just loud enough, "Looks like someone came to fix the sprinklers." Another chimed in, "Or clean the restrooms." The laughter swelled. Short, cruel bursts. Clara kept her eyes on the manager. The woman finally approached, lips pursed. "We expect a certain standard of appearance here," she said, voice dipped in condescension. "Golf is a gentleman's game. And ladies." Clara nodded once. "Understood." She didn't fidget. Didn't shuffle back toward her truck. The manager hesitated, perhaps unnerved by the utter lack of embarrassment radiating off this woman who clearly didn't belong. With a sigh, she waved a manicured hand. "Fine. If you insist. Go to the starter's tent. You'll be placed in one of the early groups." As Clara moved forward, the patio crowd parted like the Red Sea, eyes darting away, but not before drinking in every detail of her ragged clothes, her short-cropped hair, the heavy calluses on her hands. Someone snickered again. She heard a woman hiss to her husband, "This is a waste of a slot." Clara said nothing. She didn't lower her head. Didn't speed up her steps. Inside her chest, her heart was steady, her breathing calm. She had come to play. She had come to win. And no amount of polished laughter or pristine lawns was going to change that. The starter's tent was a small white canopy pitched awkwardly beside the main path, like an afterthought. Inside, a teenager in khakis and a club polo looked up from his clipboard. His mouth twitched slightly at the sight of her. "Name?" he asked, pen poised. "Clara Fisher." His eyes flicked to the list, hesitated, then found her name. Surprise flashed across his face. Maybe he hadn't expected the battered woman before him to match the name on the neat typewritten page. He handed her a scorecard, a flimsy pencil, and a bright pink visitor badge. "You're in Group 3. Tee off in 40 minutes. Practice range is that way." Clara nodded, sliding the badge into her pocket without pinning it to her chest like a brand of shame. As she crossed the immaculate grounds toward the range, the jeering didn't stop, it simply shifted. Now it was sharp glances, half-hidden smirks. A cluster of young men in pastel polos nudged each other as she passed. A woman, draped in designer golf wear, stage whispered. Maybe she'll teach us how to hit rocks. Clara ignored it all. Her bag was a relic, sun-bleached canvas with fraying seams. The clubs inside were a hodgepodge, a driver with a dent near the head, a putter whose grip was worn down to the wood, and a few battered irons salvaged from estate sales and pawn shops. Each club had a story. Each club had been earned. She stepped onto the pristine driving range, planting herself at the far end, away from the clusters of laughing elites and their gleaming titanium sets. Clara set a ball on the tee. No fancy glove. No practice swings. She adjusted her stance, her weight sinking into the worn soles of her sneakers. The sun bore down, harsh and unkind. She exhaled, and swung. Crack. The ball soared, a clean, sharp arc slicing through the heavy summer air, landing dead center of the 300-yard flag like a whisper cutting through a crowd. Silence. Then the slow creak of heads turning. Another ball. Another swing. Crack. Another perfect shot, straight, true, effortless. Now the conversations faltered. A few people lowered their clubs to watch. Clara kept swinging, mechanical, graceful. Her body knew the motion like it knew how to breathe. Years of hitting balls into empty cornfields behind the shop. Years of turning rusty clubs into weapons of precision. Another shot. And another. Each ball flew farther and straighter than the last, threading between the gaudy performances of the wealthy around her. Behind her, she heard a low whistle. A few yards away, a man in a pressed navy polo muttered to his friend. "Who the hell is she?" His friend shrugged, adjusting his Ray-Bans. "Doesn't matter. She won't last on the greens." But the seeds of doubt were there now, threading their way into the fabric of the onlooker's certainty. Clara finished her bucket, wiped her hands on her jeans, and shouldered her battered bag again. She walked off the range without so much as a glance at the cluster of stunned faces. By the time she reached the first tee, there was a shift in the air. Not respect. Not yet. But curiosity. The first crack in the polished facade. Waiting at the tee was her assigned group, 2 men in club-embroidered vests, and a third man she hadn't noticed before. Tall. Tan. Inexplicably dressed more simply than the rest, khakis, a gray polo, no flashy logos or gold watches. He watched her with a strange expression. Not contempt. Not amusement. Something closer to recognition. He held out his hand. "I'm Matthew Calloway," he said. There was no smirk. No derision. Clara shook his hand, feeling the roughness of calluses that didn't belong to a life of leisure. Maybe he had once known what it was like to earn something. To claw his way up. As the other 2 men muttered introductions, barely hiding their disdain, Clara met Matthew's steady gaze and allowed herself, just for a second, to feel something she hadn't felt since she arrived. A sliver of hope. She stepped up to the first tee, slipped her old driver from the bag, and set her ball down. The fairway stretched before her, wide and glittering in the sunlight. Clara inhaled, feeling the eyes on her once again. Some still mocking. Some curious. And maybe, just maybe, 1 or 2 beginning to believe. She swung. Crack. The ball soared higher and farther than any before it. A collective intake of breath rippled across the gallery. And for the first time since she set foot in Essex Hollow, silence followed her, not in ridicule, but in awe. The first hole was a par 4, a gentle dog-leg right, but Essex Hollow didn't believe in mercy. The fairways were velvet ribbons lined with punishing bunkers, and the greens were fast enough to make seasoned players sweat. Clara didn't flinch. Her drive had landed in perfect position, 270 yards down the fairway, a clean look to the green. The 2 other men in her group shuffled awkwardly, glancing at each other. They weren't laughing anymore. One scuffed his drive into the rough, the other sliced it embarrassingly into a sand trap. Matthew, for his part, sent a steady, respectable shot down the center, but even he couldn't match Clara's effortless distance. Clara approached her ball, feeling the soft give of the manicured grass beneath her feet. She measured the distance with her eyes, No fancy rangefinder, no caddy whispering advice into her ear. Just instinct. Just the game. A crisp iron shot, clean, pure, and the ball landed a whisper away from the pin. Somewhere behind her, a few spectators who had started following the early groups let out quiet exclamations. Who was this woman? Clara didn't react. No fist pump, no satisfied smile. Just a nod to herself, quiet approval. She tapped in her birdie without ceremony. The two club men muttered and cursed under their breath, missing their putts badly. Matthew made par, flashing Clara a small, genuine smile across the green, as if he, too, was rooting for her now, against the weight of all that smugness pressing down around them. Hole after hole, Clara strung together a front nine of near perfection. Her drives were missiles. Her short game, sharp as a scalpel. Where others faltered, overeating a slope, underestimating the wind, Clara trusted her hands, trusted her gut. At the turn, after 9 holes, she was sitting at 4 under par. Whispers now rippled through the growing crowd that had begun to trail their group. She's leading. That woman, she's beating all of them. The men who had mocked her at the valet stood stiffly at the edges of the rough, their faces unreadable. And somewhere near the 15th green, a group of women in designer dresses watched with tight, brittle smiles that didn't reach their eyes. But Clara wasn't looking at them. Her eyes, when they lifted, found only the flag ahead, and once or twice the steady, almost proud look Matthew Calloway wore whenever he caught her gaze. It wasn't pity. It wasn't surprise. It was something else entirely. The back nine was a different beast. The fairways narrowed, the bunkers yawned wider, and the pin placements turned cruel. It was as if Essex Hollow itself had finally noticed Clara Fisher and decided to bare its teeth. On the 10th hole, a tricky par 3 over water, Clara faced her first real test. She stood at the tee, feeling the weight of 100 unseen eyes. The breeze picked up, tugging at her shirt, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and something sharper, anticipation, maybe. Or doubt. She adjusted her battered 7-iron in her hands. A clean swing. A slight pull to the left. The ball struck the green but took a wicked bounce, rolling, and slipping off the edge into a deep sand trap. A murmur ran through the gallery. There it was, the mistake they had been waiting for. Clara set her jaw and walked forward, calm on the outside, but inside she felt the old familiar tightness pulling at her ribs. The voice she thought she'd buried years ago whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." At the bunker, she studied the ball half buried in the lip. A brutal lie. One of her playing partners, the taller man with the club vest, smirked just enough for Clara to catch it out of the corner of her eye. Matthew said nothing, but as she knelt in the sand she felt his presence beside her, steady and solid, like an invisible hand on her back. Clara tightened her grip. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't listen to the whispers. She remembered summers as a kid, swinging borrowed clubs in cow pastures, where every shot was a gamble and every lie was worse than the last. She remembered patching her own shoes with duct tape just to keep playing. She remembered why she was here. The sand wedge rose and fell in one smooth arc. The ball popped free, kissed the green once, twice, and rolled to a stop 3 feet from the hole. A perfect recovery. The gallery gasped. Someone clapped, then quickly stopped, as if remembering they weren't supposed to root for the outsider. Clara walked up and tapped the ball in for bogey, the simplest of motions. No drama. No excuses. She took her punishment and moved forward. That, more than anything, shifted something in the crowd. Not just skill. Not just power. But grace under pressure. As they walked to the 11th tee, Matthew fell into step beside her, his voice low so only she could hear. "That was a hell of a save," he said, not with awe but respect. Like he knew exactly how much weight she'd carried up from that bunker. Clara allowed herself a brief smile. Small. Private. Real. "Thanks," she said. And they moved forward, together, into the teeth of the course, where true champions were made. By the 12th hole, the gallery had doubled. Whispers turned into open stares, A few cell phones discreetly recorded videos as Clara set up for each shot. At first, the phones had been raised to capture her failure, an amusing spectacle to share later. Now, people were filming because they didn't want to miss history. The 12th was a monster, a long par 5 with a water hazard cutting across the fairway and a vicious crosswind picking up speed. Clara stood at the tee, her battered driver in hand. "You can lay up," one of her partners offered, half mocking, half hopeful. "Might save you a penalty." She didn't answer. Instead, she set her feet, wound back, and unleashed. Crack! The ball rocketed off the face of her club, cutting through the wind like a blade. It soared clear over the water, landing in the safe, short-cut grass on the other side, a landing zone only the most aggressive players dared aim for. The gallery gasped as one. The two club men simply stared, their mouths tightening. Matthew Calloway chuckled softly under his breath. It wasn't mockery, it was admiration. Clara shouldered her old bag and walked down the fairway, the heavy silence of disbelief hanging around her like a cape. On her approach shot, she dropped the ball 15 feet from the pin. 2 putts later, a birdie. From somewhere near the green, a voice, low and awed, said aloud, "She's the real deal." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted again. Where there had been ridicule, now there was a slow, growing respect, grudging in some, eager in others. At the 13th hole, a little boy near the ropes shouted, "Go, lady!" before his mother quickly hushed him, cheeks flushing. Clara allowed herself a tiny wave toward the boy before teeing off. She played the next 3 holes with the same steady, quiet excellence that had brought her here. No flashy fist pumps. No self-congratulations. Just focus. Just fire. Matthew stayed close during the walk between holes, occasionally offering small nods, the ghost of a grin whenever she pulled off another miraculous shot. When Clara birdied 15, pulling another stroke ahead of the field, she noticed something remarkable. Some of the crowd was now rooting for her. Outsiders recognized their own. The ones who didn't belong in the glass towers and manicured lawns. The ones who had clawed and bled and worked too hard for too little. As they walked to the 16th tee, Matthew spoke again, his voice low. "You play like someone who's had to fight for everything." Clara kept her eyes forward. "Maybe I have." There was no self-pity in her tone. Just truth. Matthew chuckled again, a richer sound this time. "I figured. Only people who've been counted out know how to hit a shot like you did on 12. Clara shot him a sideways glance, sizing him up. He wore the easy clothes of a man who could afford to dress down, but up close, the watch tucked under his cuff was understated, expensive. There was a scar near his temple, mostly hidden by his hair, a hint that he hadn't always lived soft. Maybe he wasn't just another rich man playing dress-up. Maybe he remembered too. At the 16th tee, Clara planted her feet once more, feeling the wind shift. The entire course seemed to hold its breath. She swung. The ball sailed, high, pure, and straight, toward the narrow ribbon of fairway. Behind her, even the club members who had laughed that morning now stood silent, watching her dominate a course designed to break players far more privileged than she had ever been. Clara Fisher was no longer the woman in the shabby jeans and battered sneakers. She was the player they couldn't ignore. The 17th hole was brutal, a narrow par 3 over a canyon of tall grass and scrub brush. Missed the green, and you were fighting for double bogey. Clara took her time at the tee, letting the growing murmur of the crowd fade into white noise. The sun was slipping lower now, casting long shadows across the fairways, turning the world gold and restless. She gripped her old 8-iron and swung. The ball arced high, higher than she'd intended. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought she'd lost it. But it dropped like a stone, catching the slope of the green and rolling, slow, deliberate, stopping just 8 feet from the hole. The crowd exhaled in one breath. She felt Matthew's gaze on her again as she walked forward. Not studying her swing, not assessing her like an investment. Seeing her. She tapped in for par while the others stumbled, one into the rough, the other into the bunker. Even Matthew, steady as he was, had to scramble for bogey. As they headed to the final hole, he fell in step beside her once more. "You do this professionally?" he asked casually, but there was an undercurrent there, something more curious, almost hopeful. Clara shook her head. "No. I fix cars. And swing a club when I can." His mouth twitched into the beginning of a smile. "Could have fooled all of Essex Hollow." She didn't answer. The 18th tee loomed ahead, grand and intimidating, a long par 4 framed by towering oaks and an audience growing thicker by the minute. It should have felt overwhelming. It didn't. Clara felt lighter than she had all day. She teed up her ball and paused, letting herself feel the moment, the roughness of her calloused hands, the worn fabric of her jeans brushing her legs, the weight of every hard year behind her. Then she swung. Crack! The ball flew straight as an arrow, landing exactly where she aimed, like it had no choice but to obey her. The crowd broke into scattered applause this time, real, genuine. Clara stepped back, slipping her club into her bag. Matthew watched her, something thoughtful in his eyes. "You know," he said, voice low, almost tentative, "people spend millions trying to buy what you have naturally." She gave him a sideways glance, her smile dry. "And what's that?" He shrugged. "Heart. Grit. Something you can't fake." For the first time all day, Clara allowed herself a real smile, not for the gallery, not for the game, but for herself. Whatever happened on the last green, she had already won something far more precious than a trophy. She had made them see her. The green at 18 was cut like glass, sloping treacherously toward a hidden runoff that had swallowed many dreams before hers. Clara knelt behind her ball, tracing the break with her eyes, feeling the grain of the grass beneath her fingertips. The putt was long, 20 feet uphill, with a slight left-to-right break. Around her, the crowd stood still, a wall of breathless faces. No more mockery. No more smirks. Just hope. Not hope for her failure, but for her victory. She stood, settled over the ball. Her hands were steady. Her heart calm. She drew the putter back and stroked the ball forward. It rolled true, tracking the line she'd seen in her mind, turning gently, obediently, and dropped into the cup with a soft, perfect rattle. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the gallery erupted. Not the polite clapping reserved for familiar names. No, this was raw, rising, undeniable. Clara straightened, blinking against the setting sun. Applause crashed around her like a tide, washing away every sneer, every whisper, every quiet cruelty she had endured. Her hands tightened around the grip of her old putter, grounding her. Matthew was standing just beyond the green, smiling, not the easy, surface smile of the rich, but something real, something rare. He gave her a small nod, a gesture that spoke louder than any words. "I see you." Clara lifted her chin, her chest rising with a slow, deep breath. She hadn't come here for anyone's approval. But it sure as hell felt good to take it anyway. The crowd still buzzed, their cheers trailing into excited chatter as Clara made her way toward the scorer's tent. She kept her head down, her battered bag slung over her shoulder like a worn-out shield. It wasn't humility. It was armor, the same armor she'd worn for years, against disbelief, against pity, against the feeling of being invisible. At the edge of the green, Matthew Calloway waited, casually leaning on his driver, a quiet space parting around him as if people instinctively knew he was different. As Clara passed, he straightened. "Clara," he said, his voice low but cutting through the noise. "Wait." She stopped. Turned. Their eyes locked again, the same way they had all afternoon. "You free for a few minutes?" he asked. She hesitated. She could feel eyes on them, curious and sharp. But something about the way he asked, not demanding, not assuming, made her nod. He walked beside her toward the quiet of the old oak trees lining the 18th fairway, away from the throng. His stride was easy but deliberate. "I meant what I said back there." He started, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You've got something that money can't buy." Clara arched an eyebrow. "Is this the part where you offer to help me? Sponsor me? Make me a charity case?" Matthew laughed, an actual, surprised laugh. No. You don't need saving, Clara. Anybody paying attention can see that. He paused, searching her face. I'm offering you a partnership. She stared at him, wary. Partnership? He nodded. I own a few businesses. One of them is a foundation that backs underdog athletes, people who don't have trust funds or private coaches. He smiled, but there was something serious behind it. I don't throw money at just anyone. But you're the real deal. I want to help you get into real tournaments. Get you the equipment, the travel, whatever you need. Clara looked away, the wind tugging at her short hair. No one had ever offered her anything without expecting something back. No one had ever said, I believe in you, without strings. You don't even know me, she said finally, voice rough. I know enough, Matthew said simply. I know grit when I see it. I know heart. And I know this world needs more people like you in it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sun sank lower behind the trees, the light wrapping them in a quiet gold. Finally, Clara exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried years of suspicion and hard-earned pride. All right, she said, her voice steady. But on my terms. Matthew grinned, wide and genuine. I wouldn't expect anything less. And for the first time that day, Clara realized. Maybe this wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. The old pickup rattled as Clara guided it out of the Essex Hollow parking lot, the setting sun a molten river on the horizon. The pink visitor badge still sat crumpled in her cup holder, forgotten. Her clubs, battered and loyal, clattered softly in the back seat with every bump. She smiled at the sound. It felt right. Familiar. Beside her, folded neatly on the passenger seat, was the card Matthew had given her. Nothing flashy, just his name, a phone number, and a simple embossed logo she didn't recognize. He hadn't pressured her. No contracts, no grand promises. Just the offer, and the respect that came with it. The power to choose was hers. And Clara knew that was why she'd even consider calling him at all. At a red light, she stared out the cracked windshield at the skyline of town, far in the distance. She thought of the garage, the smell of oil and burnt coffee, the days so long her hands cramped around wrenches even in her sleep. She thought of the nights she spent practicing at the dusty municipal range, balls scuffed and torn, chasing a dream no one else had ever taken seriously. She thought of the laughter at the club gates that morning, the disbelief, the cruelty. And she thought of the applause as her final putt rattled home, raw and real, echoing in her bones. Clara had walked into Essex Hollow alone, carrying nothing but her skill, her grit, and the weight of every rejection she'd ever swallowed. And she'd left having earned something nobody could take away. Respect. Not because of the clothes she wore. Not because of a famous last name. But because of who she was when no one was looking. The light turned green. Clara eased the truck forward, the engine growling in protest. Tomorrow, she would call Matthew. Not because she needed saving. Because she was ready to climb even higher. On her own terms. With her own hands. And maybe, just maybe, with someone standing beside her who understood what it meant to have once been unseen, and to rise anyway. The horizon stretched wide and wild ahead of her. And Clara Fisher, who had once been nothing more than a whisper against the storm, was finally ready to roar. 2 weeks later, Clara stood at the edge of another course, not Essex Hollow, but Pine Valley Regional, a gritty public track with cracked asphalt paths and patchy greens. No linen dresses here. No valet stands. Just the game. Matthew was already waiting by the battered clubhouse, leaning against a post like he had all the time in the world. When Clara approached, he straightened, tossing a paper cup into the trash. He wore the same unassuming clothes, the same steady look in his eye. She met his gaze squarely. You still serious about that offer? She asked. Matthew smiled, a slow, easy smile. I was serious the second you hit that bunker shot on 10. Clara crossed her arms, feeling the familiar weight of caution, but it was softer now, worn thinner by the simple fact that, against every odd, someone had seen her. Okay, she said. I'll work with you. But no charity. No special treatment. Matthew nodded once. Deal. Just opportunity. You do the rest. He held out a folder, thick, plain, professional. Inside were entries for 3 regional tournaments. Travel arrangements. New equipment. Access to coaching if she wanted it, but not forced, never forced. Resources, not rescue. As she flipped through the pages, something hot and unfamiliar pressed behind Clara's eyes. Not gratitude exactly. She never begged for a handout, never would. No, it was something bigger. Recognition. A chance. A door she would kick open with her own 2 hands. She closed the folder and looked at him. I'm not changing who I am, she said, half a warning, half a promise. Matthew's smile widened. I wouldn't have made the offer if I thought you would. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. Somewhere across the cracked practice green, a kid in threadbare sneakers hacked at a ball, laughing even as it skittered sideways. Clara slung her old bag onto her shoulder, the canvas brushing against her side like an old friend. All right then, she said. Let's get to work. As they walked toward the first tee, side by side, Clara felt it, not the roar of a crowd, not the glitter of fame. Something quieter. Something stronger. The solid, unshakable certainty that she had finally claimed her place, not because someone gave it to her. Because she had earned it. And this was just the beginning.